What's up, Meta Nerds? In this video, we're going to talk about why the Sith stopped taking children as apprentices. We all know that Jedi would train younglings, normally detecting Force-sensitive children and taking possession of them shortly after birth. Of course, this wasn't just a Jedi preference, but a long-standing rule that anyone, even just a couple of years old, would have developed too many attachments to ever become a good Jedi.
What does that got to do with anything?
Everything!
But the Sith also had a long tradition of taking children to become their Sith apprentices. The massive Sith Empire of the Old Republic era maintained academies with thousands of Force sensitives, many chosen as children just like the Jedi. Even when Bane put an end to that empire, this tradition continued. Darth Bane was one of, if not the most important Sith in history, who, whether you see it as good or bad, ended the Sith Empire and initiated the Rule of Two. The first to carry out this rule was his apprentice, an orphaned little girl. At only 10 years old, she would go through the loss of her friends, family, a suicide attempt, and a couple murders, before all of this dark side emotion attracted Darth Bane. This was in the year 1000 BBY, but by around 50 BBY, Plagueis would say this very cryptic statement about a change in the Sith Order. The Mune and Master of Palpatine said, quote, "For the past 500 years, the Sith of the Bane line had eschewed selecting children as apprentices, finding it more advantageous to discover beings who had already been hardened or scarred by life." Plagueis, though, had been an exception. So what caused the shift? Well, if we go back 500 years from 50 BBY, we find Darth Gravid carrying the mantle of the Sith Order. He was a bit like an anti-Bane, a character who decided that instead of dedicating oneself to the dark side exclusively, and being the sole embodiment of the dark side's will, he thought it would be a good idea to combine Sith and Jedi philosophies. Gravid thought that the Order was doomed if it stayed isolated in the dark side, but also knew that the Jedi Order could be improved by incorporating dark side practices. He also reasoned that the Sith of old would corrupt future Sith, so he decided to destroy or hide all of the Sith artifacts and holocrons. In the year 552, his plan was in full swing, but again, good or bad depending on how you look at it, his apprentice, a female Twi'lek named Darth Gean, saved the Sith Order by slaying her master. Now I think given all this context, we can reason that Darth Gravid was taken as a child apprentice. The timeline matches up perfect for what Plagueis stated, and trying to destroy millennia of Sith history and change the very definition of what it means to be a Sith is a pretty good reason to change up the rules on who can be an apprentice. And most important of all, remember that Plagueis said that since 550 BBY, the Sith were making sure that they only chose those who were full of hate, beings who had already been hardened or scarred by life. The thing that Gravid wanted to incorporate into the Sith most of all was the Jedi practice of empathy and altruism. Things you might hold on to if life hadn't brutally beaten those concepts out of you, if experience hadn't filled him full of hate at the game of life itself. So that's why the Sith stopped taking children as apprentices from 550 BBY on, but let's not forget that Plagueis brings this story up to point out that he was an exception to this half a millennia adhered to rule. What I find ironic about that is kind of related to what we mentioned in other videos, as you can see Plagueis as the guy that brought about the end of the Sith. Of course, it was Darth Vader who physically and literally overthrew the last Sith of the Bane lineage, but it was Plagueis' intense dark side experiments that forced the light side to, in effect, smash an emergency button. The Force itself had to bring about the Chosen One in order to combat Plagueis' prying too deep into the mysteries of the Force and altering midichlorians themselves. So in the end, perhaps it was a good rule for Sith not to take on children as apprentices. And I might add that even Darth Bane, in a way, at least agreed with the spirit of the law, choosing Darth Zannah only because he could tell that she was already thoroughly scarred by life. But what do you think of this rule? Do you like there being a difference in the Jedi and Sith, with the Jedi trying to mold an innocent and naive infant into the light side, while the Sith choose older beings who are bruised and cut up by the hardships of life? Or would you like to see future Star Wars material that shows us what an academy of Sith younglings would be like? Definitely let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. As for the behind the scenes facts, this story comes from the novels Darth Plagueis and the Darth Bane trilogy. So that's it for why the Sith stopped training children circa 550 BBY. If you want to connect with us, help support the channel, or get your own copies of the reference materials used to make these videos, be sure to check out the links in the description. Special shout out to our supporters over on Patreon, but most important of all, remember, choose your apprentice wisely, and the Force will be with you, always.